The resilience of folks living in the 21st century. Into the world he came, could have had any name, but for illustration, we'll just call him Joe. 1900 ushered in, 20th century began. In his life, these things he would know. At 14 years old, it begun the tragedy of World War I. For 4 years, Americans were sent to fight. 22 million people died. No think could hold the tears cried, and the victors predicted that all would be right. Well, at the end of the war was a pandemic and more. Spanish flu would take 50 million lives. It ravaged the planet for 2 years, increased many fears, and took children and husbands and wives. Before Joe turned 29, there was an increase in the line. People lined up for food. Joe as well. The Great Depression began. 4 more years it ran. And at 33, Joe had some horror stories to tell. Unemployment was rising, not too surprising, for the world GDP dropped over 27%. Few had enough to eat, and to have a job was a treat. Most wondered where the good life had went. 6 years later, who knew the beginning of World War II? The U.S. was fully brought to her knees. Pearl Harbor, 41 horrific acts were done. And in 6 years, 75 million people's lives would cease. Joe had learned to be thrifty, even when he turned 50. And again faced with the Korean War, 5 million killed. 5 years later, still brewing, what is the world doing? Vietnam War seemed like people's fates ever sealed. For 20 years without end, conflicts would daily trend, and 4 million more lives would be lost. Political unrest, daily trend, would this ever end? And the enormous was economic and lives cost. Ever amidst Vietnam fighting and additional conflicts uninviting, 62, the Cuban Missile Crisis added more pain. Young soldiers were sent, family structures were bent. History rewinds conflicts again and again. Today, Iran and Iraq, Middle East does not lack contribution for a world of unrest. Korea and China, Russia too, daily impacts what we do, and today the coronavirus presents a test. But as history clearly shows, almost everybody knows, life in the 21st century not for the meek. Only the strong and faithful survive. Everyday tests will arrive, and every encounter his counsel and guidance we seek. Joe today, well, he's gone, but his memory lives on, and life's lessons of generation taught us well. If you find discouragement and despair, then assess life and compare, and when you find it, Joe's story you can tell. Today's challenge may be grave, but if some history you say, perhaps the impossible might not seem so large. Whatever task we face in this human race can be accomplished when we acknowledge that God's always in charge.